Maurice.
Okay. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? I'm an alcoholic. My name is Sister Maurice, and I approve this message. What a blessing it is to be on this holy ground. When I awakened this morning and I was talking over my assignments with my higher power, and he said, "You will be in holy ground." And it is an honor and a privilege to be here and to be in your beautiful presence. I'd like to thank Anna and whoever else influenced Anna to have me come from a place called the Bronx. The Bronx is famous for a few things. There are only two places in the world that have "the" in front of them. One is the Bronx and the other is the Vatican. And I'm associated with both of those places. As Henry VIII said to each of his 6 wives, I won't keep you very long. I'd like to thank you for coming to be with me on this, the most important day of my life. It's not my birthday. It's not the anniversary of anything in particular. Yes, it is. 56 years ago today, I graduated from high school. And shortly thereafter, I had to make a major decision. Will I go and be a nun, or will I marry a gentleman that's standing up there? And God said, go to the convent. But today is the most important day of my life because it's the only one I have. And when people come to be with you at such a significant time, you try to remember them. At least I do. And I'll try to remember you because you're here with me on this, the most important day of my life. When I drive along our highways, I see signs that interest me, and I jot them down. I saw one not too long ago outside a church. I thought it was beautiful. It said, God is good. Father O'Brien is better. I thought that was very, very interesting. I have many stories to share, But I know we have a time factor here, so you'll have to come catch me another time to hear my stories. If you don't remember anything I shared this afternoon, please remember this, because this is how I want to be remembered. It's the most important thing about me at any point on a clock. I'm an alcoholic, which means 1 brandy, 2 brandies, 3 brandies, floor. I'm a woman. I'm a member of a religious community. I'm an RN, a real nun. I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous in good standing. In particular, the Forest Hills group in Queens, New York. That's my home group. And the last thing I tell you about myself is my name. Incidentally, my name is Sister Maurice. One of the things that I'm partial to in our fellowship is that it's a fellowship of equals. There are no titles in Alcoholics Anonymous or Al-Anon. No one really cares what you do for a living. I love that expression, fellowship of equals. I don't think there's another outfit in society that can claim fellowship of equals like we can. At least we'd match any other group that's out there. And yet, you have never been anything else in the fellowship other than Sister Maurice. Isn't that a title? I see it as my name. It's on all my important papers. It's on my driver's license. It's the name I've been using most of my life. It's still written up quite well, 2 police stations, City of New York. But moreover, it's the name that I gave when I came into the fellowship a while back. A call had been made, and I was to go to the Forest Hills group of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I wasn't quite sure that someone of my class and caliber should be going to such a place as AA. So I was not a happy camper when I came. But little by slowly, thanks to folks like you, that has all changed. So much so that I can say quite comfortably today, I choose to live the AA way of life. For a few years I said, I have to go to AA, gotta go to AA, better go to AA. I don't have to, gotta, or better. I choose to live the AA way of life. And when I talk about something being a way of life, it's not an incidental experience. It's not something I do when the Spirit moves me. A way of life, to me, is as much a part of me as my right hand and my left hand. And that's the way I see Alcoholics Anonymous today. But for starters, I came to the first meeting. I went up the stairs, down the stairs, into a little room. There was one man in the room. He took a look at me, came running across the room, grabbed my hand, told me who he was, and then he said, "What's your name?" I said, "Me?" He said, "Yeah, what's your name?" Oh, I said, "I'm Sister Maurice." Now, this man didn't say, "We'll have a group conscience meeting and I'll get back to you." The very next thing the man said was, "Hi, Sister Maurice, you're welcome." And in my just 39 years in the fellowship, no one has ever suggested that I call myself anything else. The name is important, it's mine. But the most important thing about me, at any point on a clock, is what I told you first and foremost. I am an alcoholic. And each and every time I say that, beginning first, when I awaken in the morning, I don't know how you sleep. Of course I don't. But I sleep primarily on my right side. And when I awaken in the morning, I don't even know I have two eyes, because this one is buried in the pillow. Before I go looking for this eye, the very first thing I do, I announce before my God, I am an alcoholic. It sets the tone. It puts me on the right wavelength. And any time thereafter that I say I'm an alcoholic, I am reminded that of all the things I do each day that God gives me, my most important job, work, task, assignment is that I stay sober. And I do that best through the principles and traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous as they have been written. When I came a while back, I was given a book. I thought it was an interesting way the book was given to me. The lady who gave it to me was much shorter than I was, and she stood out in front of me, and she said, "Here is a big book." No coincidence, I'm very farsighted. And I saw some fellows over there putting some shiny signs on the wall. And my eye hit upon the one that said, "Keep it simple." And as sick and all as I was, I said to myself, wouldn't dare say it to the lady, boy, do these people practice what they preach. Because you can't get much simpler than that. Here is a big book. Of course, now we have the paperback version, which I call the small big book. I don't call it the small book. I don't call it the little book. Because there's another book in the bookstore in the mall called the small book. And it talks about being an alternative to Alcoholics Anonymous. So I call ours the small big book. Well, you introduce anything new in AA or Al-Anon, and they send for you. This fella came to me one night, and he had a small, big book, and he's pacing up and down. And he said, "Sister, you call this the small, big book?" I said, "I do." He said, "That's a contradiction." I said, "Contradiction?" He said, "Small, big, small, big." I thought for a moment, and I said, "Well, we have had jumbo shrimp for years." If you didn't get that, you could see me later. Well, I took the book from you, the one that was called Big, and this is what was said. I was told I should read the big book, I should study the big book, I should believe what I found there, I should share what I believe, and I should practice what I share. And then this lady said, "We suggest you do that along with the people who know how to do it best." And she called that outfit the fellowship. And then she put the whole thing together. And she said, "That is a design for living that really works." What do I know about anything? I said, "Let me see what I can do." And that design for living has worked so well for this lady here that I don't spend a fleeting moment of my precious time looking around for alternative ways to go. I need all the help I can get, believe you me, but it is always as a secondary measure to the program. Alcohol became a way of life for me in a very short period of time. It dictated my moods, it made my decisions, it said you will, and it said you won't. I found it very hard to eventually surrender to the fact that whenever the first drink, I thought maybe the 21st, but whenever the first drink of alcohol would go into this body, mind, and spirit, two things happened. One, I didn't know how many more I was going to have. Two, I didn't know what the behavior would be like. However, if you met me along the way and you said, "Sister, how many drinks did you have or will you have?" I would have said 2, because that's what a lady should have. And if you said to me, "What was your behavior like or what will it be like?" I would have said, "Steady as you go." Because that's how I saw myself. But I know today it was very different. I was a first grade teacher at the time, and I had the reputation in those days of being the best teacher in the school. When the children came to first grade after Labor Day each September, by the end of September, my kids were ready for college. So at 10 o'clock in the morning, I'd be working real hard, and something would start in my body, mind, and spirit, screaming, "You need a drink." And the very next thing I would do, morning after morning, I would put up against the screaming what people told me I had so much of, and that was willpower. And the willpower approach was futile. And I went on to learn, and I'm glad I did, that it wasn't that I was a weak-willed individual, but rather I was a diseased person. I was a sick, untreated alcoholic. And when you're in that condition, it goes beyond the strength of your will to do other than to satisfy what's going on in here. So I'd move to the next phase of the game plan. And I'd say, well, it's a couple of minutes after 10. These kids can go out to the bathroom. Then they can have their snack. Get the teacher next door to keep an eye on them, because I'm a responsible teacher. And then I'll run over to the convent, get a drink, be back when this is all over. And I'd be running across the yard to the convent morning after morning. And this would be my thinking. This is going to be my last drink, at least until I've done my day's work. I was too sick to recall in those days that at 5 a.m., when the big bell went off to get us into our day, my story goes back to old God's time before we went mod. And we had this bell that went off at 5 a.m. And for me to get into anything in those days, I had to reach over from my bed and take that drink. And I hated doing that. And each and every time I did it, I would say, "This is going to be my last drink, at least until I've done my day's work." So whenever I would take the first one, everything would center around, when am I going to get the next one? And yet, if you met me along the way and you said, "Sister, who or what is the center of your life?" I would have been insulted by the question. You just called me sister. You see how I'm dressed. Every piece from stem to stern. You just saw me come out of that building called convent. And you're asking me who's the center of my life. How come you don't know the center of my life is God? And I would have been insulted by the question. Today, I try to live honestly, thanks to folks like you. And I have no problem in sharing. Somewhere along the way, the focus in my life shifted. And it shifted from God to that next drink. And I justified the use of alcohol in my life. I might say, too, because maybe someone needs to hear it, it was not one of my goals in life to become an alcoholic. I do not see alcoholism as self-inflicted. I believe it is a disease, sickness, condition that comes to a person. I think it's a marvelous and wonderful idea that we have steps that suggest to us that in God's time we make amends because we are accountable. But I don't hold myself responsible for the condition that came to me. However, I hold myself very, very, very responsible for the precious life-giving gift of sobriety that has been given to me. I did not get sober. I tried. I couldn't pull it off. I don't believe a person can get sober. That's my opinion. I believe something bigger, greater, outside of the person takes place. They call it a miracle. And I believe the precious life-giving gift of sobriety and the precious life-giving gift of recovery in Al-Anon is given. Given by one bigger, greater than all of us put together. I choose to call that one God. So I feel very responsible to take care of the precious, life-giving gift of sobriety that God has given me. So much so that I have no problem in sharing with you. If you should ever hear that Sister Maurice is back drinking, please, please, don't call me a victim. Call me a volunteer. And the very next thing you should say, somewhere along the line, she wasn't willing to do everything necessary to stay sober. I cannot plead ignorance today. You have taught me, and taught me well, how to take care of the precious gift of sobriety each day that God gives me. Going back to the scene in the bed with the eye in the pillow, the second thing I do each morning before I go looking for the eye, I pray the Lord's Prayer. And when I reach the part that says, give us this day our daily bread, I emphasize the word daily because I want to remind myself, I will have sufficient bread, sufficient help for the day. He will not refuse anyone who asks for the bread, the help. But it's my responsibility then to take the bread, the help, and to use it to take care of the gift of sobriety for the rest of that day. There are advantages to years of sobriety. I've had them. There are advantages to years of recovery in Al-Anon. But as the years of sobriety, the years of recovery increase, so do the perils of smugness. Complacency is a killer. The little sheep that strays from the flock is usually the one that's found in the ditch, over the embankment, hanging from the barbed wire fence. A favorite fruit of mine is a banana. And every time I eat a banana, I have a meditation. And the meditation is, the banana that leaves the bunch is the one that gets skinned. I have a drunkalogue that tells you quite well that all by myself I can stay very sick and quite drunk. But I truly believe I cannot stay sober and fairly well without you. Well, how do you really know that, Sister Maurice? You've never left us. When God was giving out ears, I thought he said beers. And I said 2 large ones. I'm an excellent listener to the sharing of other people. I was affected physically, mentally, spiritually, socially, emotionally from this disease. Physically, I fared out pretty well. There were times I tried to arrange my own physical death. I used to take the car, leave the Bronx, go across the George Washington Bridge, up the Palisades Parkway, pull over where you could sightsee. And I'd say, when those cars are gone, when those folks are gone, I'm going to run this car over the embankment because I don't know what's the matter with me. And then I'd have what I call a moment of amazing grace. And I'd say, you know what? I'll go get a drink. I'll come back and do this another time. So I was not to die physically, but there are other ways of dying I'm sure you can identify. I suffered the death of my values. I suffered the death of my integrity. I suffered the death of everything that I stood for as a woman, everything I stood for as a sister. All those areas of my life died. Outwardly, I looked pretty good, held a job, did it fairly well, tried to keep up with my responsibilities, and above all, I always said my prayers. No matter what shape I was in, I was always praying away. And some of you have shared with me that you thought you missed the boat because you didn't pray enough. Listen, I prayed enough for you and all belonging to you. So this disease must be so big, and indeed it is, that something as powerful as prayer will not get you through it. And yet we say, where would we be without prayer? Prayer is a path where there is none. But I think for folks like you and me, There's another piece that goes with the prayer. I describe it this way: pray and row the boat. And this beautiful way of life, this design for living, our beautiful program, enables us to do that, to pray and to row the boat. I denied that alcohol was my problem. I was somewhat relieved when I learned that denial is the major presenting symptom of alcoholism. And when you're in denial, you're not in touch with reality. What I knew about my situation would fit on a postage stamp. What was happening in my life was as big as the state of New York. But if I didn't have it up here when it was presented, then it didn't happen. Now, I had hundreds of people talk to me about my drinking and the behavior that went with it. Some of them wanted to be martyrs at an early age. The nerve of that one coming in here, who she thinks she is? And there were many times that I exercised the denial. My mother was in the hospital in New York City having a total hip operation. She was there for months and months and months. The operation wasn't as perfected then as it is today. Now I think they do it going up and down in the elevator. I went every day to be at my mother's bedside, because that's where a good daughter should be. And one day my beautiful mother, beautiful Irish, soft-spoken lady, she says to me in a whisper, "If you don't come tomorrow, it'll be just fine. You must have a lot of work to do around the convent and the school. Why don't you skip a few days?" And I sat there thinking, wow, there she is with all her pain, and she's thinking of me. Well, I know today, because I'm in touch with reality, that my beautiful mother could not bring herself to say, "You're an embarrassment to me. You're no help to me. I don't need you around this hospital drunk." Now, I have just one sister, and she's also a sister. I don't call her sister, but yet she's my sister. If you didn't get that, we'll explain it later. And during my active alcoholism, my sister secretly wished she had joined a missionary community and lived in Mexico. It's very hard to be proud of a sick, untreated alcoholic. I know that today. I didn't know it then. Well, my sister came to the hospital to visit my mother. She gave me one of those come outside the door kind of winks. I dutifully went outside. I figure she needs my advice, my opinion. That's what I'm there for. My sister's very tall, and like my mother, a beautiful, soft-spoken lady. So we're outside, and she says in a whisper, "Why? Why would you come to this hospital at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, drinking?" I was just about to give her a lecture when it dawned on me. We've been down this road 100 times before. To the best of my recollection, not a word did I speak. But being a typical alcoholic, that's all that I am, typical alcoholic, couldn't let well enough alone. You know one of our songs, first you say you will, and then you won't. I took my right hand, the more powerful of my two, and I belted her. Shortly thereafter, 2 nurses came running down the hall, and they are yelling, "Sisters, sisters!" They were not calling us sisters because we were related by blood, but we were dressed like sisters used to dress. Some still dress today. My veil was on the floor, hers was someplace else. Now, I learned a few years later that one of the major rules in this hospital is that no patient leaves their room unescorted. They were coming out crutches, wheelchairs, all fours. Because the word got around there were 2 nuns out there killing one another. Now, in the midst of this chaos, I had a couple of concerns. I did not have the concern, maybe I shouldn't have belted her. I did not have the concern, maybe I shouldn't have had the last drink before I came down here. My major concern, as I'm looking up at my sister, is why did she scream? That's how we have the hoop-de-doo. Well, you know, I look back today with the sober, clear head. You know, it's perfectly normal. You belt someone, they let out a hoot. The other concern I had, my purse had fallen onto the floor, making a rather loud sound as it fell to the floor. I wasn't too concerned about the few dollars in the purse. I have a vow of poverty. I kept it quite well during this time. But I was very concerned about the pint of holy water in the purse. 1 pint of Christian Brothers brandy. And what is the thinking of a sick, untreated alcoholic? No one leaves here with that purse other than you know who. Now, there's only one word to describe someone who'd be in that position. And I had to go through a lot of other descriptions before, with help, I could get to what's proper, right, and fitting. And if there's anyone in this gathering who still sees themselves in this first group, I would suggest you leave that thinking here this afternoon because it does not apply. I had to go through bad, hopeless, weak-willed, sinner, you should know better. But the way I would describe someone today would be sick, unwell, not playing with full deck. Or I heard a fellow one night at a meeting, he described himself. He said he was a quart low. I heard another fellow another night, he said he had a photogenic mind. He just never had any film in the camera. Well, I had to go ways before I could see myself as sick and unwell. If you drink and you drive, you might miss the mark. I was always behind the wheel of a car. It was an insult to show on your face that you would drive us home. I brought you there, I bring you home. My first accident, July of 1970, Sister Rose was in court over the dismissal of a teacher from her school. There was a big to-do down there in the Archdiocese of New York. She had a prominent lawyer appointed by the diocese, and I said, I'll be in court to help the lawyer help Rose. How do we affect the people on the other side of the coin? The night before the trial, Sister Rose called me up. She said, please, you don't have to come tomorrow. And I thought for a moment, and I said, well, you'll have a lot of paperwork to do. I'll go to my classes, I'll meet you downtown at lunchtime, and you can brief me for the afternoon session. And to be rid of me, she said, fine. Well, I was in graduate school that summer, and I drove well fortified from the top of the Bronx to the Wall Street section of the city. 5 minutes after 12 lunchtime, a working day in Wall Street, and the weather was clear. Those are the things they tell you at the top of the police report. It's important for us to know the weather. A United States mail truck parked by the curb, minding its own business, got in my way, and I smashed into it. And when the policeman came on the driver's side, first word out of his mouth, you couldn't miss it. He said, sister. Now, I was a little taken back. He didn't say, sister, are you hurt? Could I call someone? You think women will ever be ordained? He said, sister, could you have been drinking? And for a moment, I wondered how the guy got on the police force. As was my style, officer, could I help you? I proceeded to tell the officer about my friend who was in court, etc., etc. Well, I went into a blackout, eventually a pass out. I woke up in a convent a short distance away. I woke up in a strange bed. Half my clothes on, half my clothes off, looking around, didn't have a clue where I was, how I got there. It was not my custom then, certainly not my custom today, to wake up in strange beds. Well, I'm around long enough to know that you have your story. But at a time like that, we all have the same tricks of the trade. Where am I? What happened? And how do you get out of here? I could hear some talking through a partially open door, so I tiptoed over. I was glad the door was open a little bit so I didn't have to squeak it. You know, we may be sick, but we're not stupid. We don't go over, throw the door open, and say, what the heck happened? You go over, you put an eye and an ear out, because you hear voices, to see if you could pick up a little something, because you know from previous experiences they'll be questioning you, and you don't know anything. So I have the eye in the ear, I peek out, and I see Sister Rose. I knew as long as she was there, everything was going to be fine. She had such nice things to say about me, and if I knocked something off the shelf, she quietly put it back. The other sister Neither of us knew the lady. She was at least 7 feet tall. She was like a lunatic. And I got to the door, peeking out and listening, as the big tall sister screams at Sister Rose, your friend is on pills or she's drinking, and in order to help her, you are going to have to hurt her. I thought that was poor advice. So I took the eye and the ear in, went back to bed to get a little rest to handle Rose, who came in and asked the going question in our lives at that time. What happened? I told it as I saw it. I lost control of the car because I was so upset about the court case. Now, in those days, the car was in my mother's name. My mother didn't know about the accident. I had the car fixed, back out on the road. 3 weeks had passed. Every time we talked to Rose, when are we going to tell your mother about the accident? Never. Then the fears that set in. What if Rose tells your mother? So I called Rose up, invited her out for supper, my treat, took her to a little restaurant, leaned across the table in the restaurant and said, if you dare to tell my mother about the accident, someday you will come out of your convent. I'll be sitting in a car, and when you cross the street, that will be it. That is called threatening someone's life. Now, I always share that in my story, and one night 100 years ago now, that means a long time, I was speaking someplace, and we had a friend at the meeting. She's not in program. And at the end, she came up, and she said, do you really think you would have run over Rose? Up to that moment, no one had ever asked me that question. Not even Rose. I said, let me tell it to you this way. Of myself, no. I wouldn't hurt a fly. As a little tot, teenager, young adult, in the convent 100 years, you never knew I was around. I'm a nothing. I wouldn't harm you. But you know, you put one drink in here, the first one, and you can paint the most tragic scene you can think of. And I could be the one heading it up. And I always like to point out that it wasn't that I was at Mass the next morning or reading one of my 10,000 religious books that I had in those days, and the thought came to me, oh, you shouldn't kill Rose. That isn't what happened. You know what it was? It was another moment of that amazing grace. It just wasn't to be part of my story or part of Rose's that I would run her over. And I also like to point out that after 39 years of continuous sobriety, you put one drink in here, the first one, and you can paint the most tragic scene you can think of. And I could be the one heading it up. I don't know another disease, sickness, condition like this one. How blessed are we to have been called into a way of life where through a beautiful process, 12 suggested steps, marvelous and wonderful folks walking with you a day at a time, you can chip away at your stuff and get in touch with the marvelous and wonderful person that you are, and keep a sickness like that in check, as well as 12 suggested steps, wonderful folks walking along each day till bedtime, where you can keep the effects of that on the other side of the coin in beautiful Al-Anon. How blessed are we? However, if I fail to be grateful, I may lose the gift. But if I'm truly grateful, I will take care of the gift. Well, the disease was moving along, and one day I got a call from my boss. Now, in those days, if you got this kind of a personal call from the big boss, it was in the same category as the Pope called you up. You never heard from the big boss, personally. She'd have her secretary, the counselors. She called me personally. If she did call you personally, it was for either of two reasons. One, you were in trouble, or there was a special assignment that only you could do. So I'm driving up to see the boss, and this is my thinking. I have enough to do. Why is she asking me? So we get there, we have a little chit-chat. She says, Maurice, I'll get to the point. Some of the sisters are saying that you drink too much. Now, in those days, you wouldn't ask a question. I asked a question. I stuttered when I asked it. I said to her, well, where are they? And she got a little nervous because I guess no one ever asked her a question. And she said, oh, she said, they don't want to be mentioned. And you know, in a very sick and negative way, I would not recommend this to anyone. But at that moment, I was into one of our steps, made a list of all people who had harmed me and asked God to be rid of them. Well, I asked her another question. I said, do you really know anything about me? Because in those days, there was a gap between the big boss and the rest of us. She said, well, I have a file. She went over, she peeked in. She said, oh, you're going to get your master's degree, and you just got this award, and trophies all over. She closed the file. She said, Maurice, you have helped me. I will never, ever again believe this about any of our sisters. I said, that's a good policy to follow. She gave me an apology, and off I went. I walked back to the car, and I had one thought and one thought only. She will never, ever, ever send for me again. She never did. Next time she arrived unannounced and put me away. So when I learned about denial, I like to keep things simple. Alcohol makes the alcoholic feel fine. Yada, yada, yodi, yodi, yodi. Therefore, he or she thinks everything is fine. Meanwhile, the people looking on are going, oh, here we go again. When I learned that, it helped me immensely. You know, sometimes there's a confusion with denial and lying. There is a difference. When you lie, you have all of the info, and you say yay or nay. Denial, you may have this much info, but the people looking on have the rest of it, and that's why we're called a liar. There are times, certainly, when we did tell lies. But denial, when I learned about denial, I was fascinated. Well, I was angry and resentful, angry with God. I'd given my life to God. What more do you want? I love the word relationship. You've been my teachers about relationships. Prior to recovery, as a little tot, I put a game plan in place, trying to relate to this God, whoever or whatever he was. I don't just come from an Irish Catholic family. I have another dimension. We call it BIC, Bronx Irish Catholic. And they were always talking about going to heaven and going to hell and God's going to get you. So as a little tot, I put a game plan in place, trying to relate to this God. And I continued the game plan all the way into the convent some years later. It went like this. I sat up straight. I knelt up straight. I disciplined myself. And we didn't have the expression in those days, but the expression that would have applied. Been there, done that. And then when I was drinking, it was taking God on. If you don't need me, well, I don't need you. Well, if I don't need someone bigger, greater outside of this lady here, I wonder who I think I am. So I was angry and resentful of God. I was depressed during this time. I was in the convent many years before I picked up alcohol. Didn't like alcohol, taste of alcohol. On the 5th of January, 1967, my beautiful father, Maurice, he went to God. And upon his death, when he looked eyeball to eyeball into the eyes of God, at that moment is perfection for anyone. And whatever you lack, you will receive at that moment. And that's how my father received sobriety, because he died of alcoholism at the age of 58. And I buried my father, and I went way inside. And shortly thereafter, I came out with a drink in my hand. And I can say quite comfortably, my father and myself were carbon copies of one another, with one big difference: the way we were to receive the precious, life-giving gift of sobriety. So I was using alcohol to lift me out of a depression. I was getting more depressed. The bargaining stage, one bargain I like to share on. I got into bed one night, had my prayer beads, rosary beads, praying away, hanging onto the sheets with the other hand. I'm no sooner in the bed, I have to get up and get a drink, and I said to God, you know what? I don't want to drink anymore tonight. Please help me. I'll do more work for you and for your people. Please don't let me drink anymore tonight. Well, see, the first drink of the day always has the final say. And, of course, we had that. So the covers get pushed back. You get up out of the bed, you crawl around in the dark, you find your hiding spot, you get your bottle, and you do something you don't want to do. You take another drink. And after I took that drink that night, I beat that floor, and I doubted the existence of God. How could a God who loved me? I just asked you to help me. I'll bet there's no God. I live in downtown Manhattan, and I drive on the FDR Drive, the East River Drive, a lot of highways I drive on, and I see our brothers and sisters, yours and mine. They build their homes there on both sides. They have cardboard boxes. They need a jacket, pair of shoes, socks. And they have little brown bags. I had only one kind of brown bag. They have my kind and other kind. And those folks, our brothers and sisters, if they went over to the guardrail on the highway and beat the guardrail and doubted the existence of God, we'd say, poor socks, what have they got going for them? I was in a beautiful convent at the time. I want for nothing, and alcohol brought me to the point where I doubted the existence of God. As we say in here, whether you come from Yale or jail, Park Avenue, Park Bench, what does it matter where you came from? I think it's important to get to know your history, your story. But I put more energy into where do we go from here. Whatever happened this morning, yesterday, a week ago, a year ago, 100 years ago, you have taught me to learn from the experience and not to let it stand in the way of putting one foot in front of the other and being that person that God created you to be. And the other thing I did that night, I cried out at the top of my lungs, isn't there anybody anywhere who knows what I'm going through? Because each one in the throes of the sickness thinks nobody knows what I'm going through. It's a very lonely sickness, whether you are afflicted with the disease or affected by the disease. It's a lonely sickness. Well, I didn't know that you were up the street and around the corner and over the hill and down the road and across the mountain going through the same thing. But I'm mighty glad that somewhere along the line God saw fit that we would find one another in this beautiful fellowship. And it is God who has arranged our meeting. I truly believe that. C.S. Lewis, you've heard of him. He says in one of his writings about relationships, he talks about relationships in general. And he says it's as if God says to the people in the relationship, you have not chosen one another, but I, God, have chosen you for one another. If you think of the relationships that you have in the fellowship, would you of yourself have chosen those people? Maybe yes, maybe no. I like to think it was arranged, like happened at the Gatehouse in Akron, Ohio, some time back with Bill Wilson and Dr. Bob. And you want to know about the amazing grace of God? As a result of that arranged relationship, that's how we get to be here today at this holy ground. It's really something when you put it out there and reflect on it. Well, today I make bargains, deals, promises, commitments, and I follow through. I attribute that to one fact and one fact only. I don't drink alcohol while I'm sober. Very significant in Maurice's life. And the final stage is acceptance. The disease was moving along, and finally it all came to a head because I had two exceptional do-gooders in my life. My sister, who's a sister, and Sister Rose, keeping it very simple, they snitched. They blew the whistle and turned me into the boss that I had charmed a few months before. They brought the boss to my mother's where I was hiding out. I noticed a difference in the boss. She wasn't interested in anything I had to say. And she was saying things like, arrangements have been made. And they're expecting you in Lutheran General Hospital in Park Ridge, Illinois. I listened. She said you could go Friday or Saturday. I listened. And then she said, there you will find out what is wrong with you. And all of a sudden, way in here, I said to myself, there isn't anything wrong with me. And then she said, you'll be there for 28 days. And way in here, I said to myself, I won't be there for 28 minutes. But as sick and all as we are not stupid. And I knew the only way I was going to get out of the room and away from these three people was to say I'd go. I said, I'll go Saturday. So I went out on an AA plane, American Airlines, the way I like to go. And I met 64 charming men and women like you, and the word got around quickly that we had this sister in treatment, and one by one, all 64 came to me. They all did the same thing. They beat up on themselves. They said terrible things about themselves, but they always finished by saying, you know, sister, this is a mistake for you. You shouldn't be in a place like this. You're not like me. Well, anyone who thinks like I do is going to be my friend. I had a nifty getaway plan, and I scrapped it. I'm not one who sits around idle. At the end of the First week, I was a therapist. And the word got around, you don't like your counselor, you don't like your group, talk to the sister. Now, every day at 1 o'clock, we had what they call free time. Well, they tell you it was free, then they tell you what to do with it. We were supposed to stay in our rooms, read, write, listen to tapes. I always did as I was told. We had a nice table, tape recorder, pens, books. I'd be there promptly at 1 o'clock. I'd be there 2 minutes each day. I'd take the table, throw it clear across the room, go to the wall behind me, banging my head against the wall, yelling and screaming at God, why me? I've been so good, and this is what you've done to me. My roommate had run out. She'd say, she's at it again. They'd come in, clean me up, calm me down, blood pouring out of my head. I'd be fine till the next day at 1 o'clock. I was too sick then, and long before that time. It goes back as a little tot. I was too sick to hear God say, you don't have to be good. You are good. That's a given. No one has been deprived of that goodness. Well, where does the bad come in? Oh, that's there, attitude, behavior. I try, keyword try, to separate attitude and behavior from the person. I try, keyword try, to separate attitude and behavior from this lady here. And I continue to chip away at my attitude and my behavior through that marvelous and wonderful process. I do it along with folks like you, each day till bedtime, a day at a time. And while the process continues, sometimes quickly, sometimes slowly, I walk very, very tall. I cannot help but be impressed at the goodness, holiness, magnificence, wonderfulness, greatness that sits and stands here today. And if you're not there yet, borrow from me. I don't know another outfit in society that mentions the word spiritual or spirituality more than people in program. You want to know the key to the spiritual? It's getting in touch with your own goodness. And the world has missed the boat with that. How blessed are we to have been called into a way of life where through a very, very beautiful design for living, you can chip away at your stuff and get in touch with the marvelousness, wonderfulness, greatness. How blessed are we? However, if I fail to be grateful, I may lose the gift. But if I'm truly grateful, I will take care of the gift. Well, some 39 years later, and for quite a while now, I have a why me question of God. Not why me, why am I an alcoholic? But I put a lot of time into, why me, God? Why am I sober? Since most people don't receive this gift. And it's a frequent question. Because I don't want to take sobriety for granted. I don't want my attitude to be big deal, day at a time, 39 years. What else is new? I want to stay in touch with the gift. So God, tell me again. And he answers very loud and very clear. And he says the same thing all the time. He says, Maurice, you have not chosen me, but I have chosen you. The big book says, God did for him what he could not do for himself. And he says, many are called to the disease of alcoholism. Many are called to the condition on the other side. Very few, a drop in the bucket, are chosen for the precious life-giving gift of sobriety, the precious life-giving gift of recovery in Al-Anon. And I say, well, why me, God? And he says, make your little chart. I make a little chart. I headed alcoholism. I put a simple line down the center. I put on that side of the chart all of us in recovery, round the world, AA, Al-Anon combined, fairly big number. You put on this side all those who are still out there. You wouldn't even see us. I find it awesome to be on that side of the chart. And I don't want to take that for granted. So I do this little game plan. Well, why am I on that side of the chart? And he says, Maurice, how do you see death? 100 years ago, that means a long time, I sat with death. What is death all about? What is God doing? I was just meditating on death. And I read a line that I had read many times before. But this time I had a moment of amazing grace. And the line is, there's a time to be born, and there's a time to die. And that's on God's calendar. And I believe any person goes to God in death, regardless of age or circumstances, when their work here on earth is finished. I do not see the God of my understanding as a yo-yo. Well, I'm taking that one, I'm getting that. No, I see God this way. I may have more work for that person to do, but on God's calendar, their work is finished. And the other thing that helps me, I'll see those people again when my work is finished. Well, the point Untreated alcoholism is still listed as an ultimate terminal condition, 100% fatal. And here we are. Well, I believe our death has been interrupted because our work's not finished. There'll be tragedy in our world tonight. Some people will go to God out there, their work is finished. Others will be saved, their work is not finished. Those who are saved, I don't know what their work is, more will be revealed to them. I believe ours is defined. It's a specialized work. And nobody does it as well as the people in the rooms. With all due respect to the church, the medical profession, other forms of help. They do a lot for people like you and me. But you know what? There's just something special about one alcoholic sharing with another alcoholic. One member of Al-Anon sharing with another member of Al-Anon. There's just something special about that. So my major number one assignment on any given day, and I take the liberty of saying yours is the exact same as mine, take care of the gift of sobriety, the gift of recovery if you're an Al-Anon, carry a message, walk with, pass it on, be the fellowship. I believe that's our number one assignment on any given day. What else does he want us to do? You get notified as you go along. Well, on the 27th and a half day of the 28-day program, I woke up and there was something different about me. I was crying and laughing and shouting, I'm really an alcoholic. Because up to that moment, I had been going through the motions. And I went to see my one-on-one counselor at the facility. And I said to him, Reverend, I'm really an alcoholic. And this man did something that he never did in any of our sessions. He started dancing around the room. He got so excited. And he said, I have a prescription for you to go to Alcoholics Anonymous. And if you're faithful to that prescription, you'll only have to return here as our guest. I said, I won't make you any promises. I'll see what I can do. And by that amazing grace, as it operates in the rooms, and my cooperation with the grace, another way of saying that, we know the program works, but if you don't work the program, it doesn't work for you. So by my doing my part, I haven't found it necessary to pick up a drink or any substitute since April 17, 1971. I came into these rooms and I did the old one too. I didn't drink, went to meetings, didn't drink, didn't drink, went to meetings, didn't drink. Could always be found sitting in the third row waiting for this to be finished, but they weren't going to say I wasn't there. And one night I heard a fellow share, and this is what he said. He said he learned unless he put the 12 suggested steps into his life and made some changes, he could very well lose his sobriety. And I sat up real tall because I was sure he was going to say, we don't mean that for the little sister there in the third row. And he never said it. And with the help of people like you, I learned why I was so miserable. Oh, I heard it said, change or die. But I used to poke the one next to me. Isn't there something in between? No. To be stuck would be a luxury. We're always in motion. We're changing or we're dying. We're getting better or we're going back. No big deal. Beautiful process. Folks walking with us each day till bedtime. My responsibility before God, I'll try. So little by slowly, change started to happen and continues to happen right up to this moment. I have the changes in 3 categories. The first had to do with the intellect. When I came into the rooms, I had thinking that went ready, fire, aim. I had postage stamp thinking. I was paranoid in my thinking. I always thought the car in front of me was following me. And folks like you said, Maurice, work your steps. Don't go it alone. Do it a day at a time. It'll do wonders for your head. And I've had up here what I call an intellectual conversion up here. The moral conversion, I lost my value system. And that bothered me terribly. And we talked about that. And you said work your steps to the best of your ability. Don't go it alone. Do it a day at a time. And you'll be able to put first things first and second things second. And when you're wrong, you'll be able to promptly admit it. You'll be able to practice the principles in all your affairs. And you'll even be able to practice the principles and you won't have affairs. I took the suggestion and I got my value system back. I've had what I call a moral conversion. And then the third one. You were always talking about spirituality, and I used to say to myself, because I was very shy then, I still am today, I used to say that spirituality sounds nice, but see, I have religion. Do you know, for much of the first year, when I went to a meeting, I could not go in straight in the door. I had to go in sideways, because I had flags in my ears. Catholic, Catholic, very, very Catholic. And we talked about that. And you said, Sister Maurice, our program teaches us balance. You can keep your Catholic religion, but maybe you should get more centered. So I came back from the extreme. I still have the religion that I was brought up with. You also gave me a wonderful technique. I use it with my religion and many areas of my life. It's wonderful. I take what helps me and I leave the rest. So I said, okay, tell me about the spirituality. And you said, it has to do with relationships. Oh, I said, I didn't know that. Yeah, relating to the higher power. I said, oh, mine is a mess. You said it also has to do with relating with others. I said, oh, that's terrible. And you went on to say, it also has to do with relating to yourself. And I got very sad. I said, I'll never have spirituality because I'm a nothing. There's nothing here to relate to. And you said, we'll help you get in touch. And you have taught me the full meaning of love your neighbor as yourself, not instead of yourself. You have taught me this above all, to thine own self be true. And little by slowly, as I chipped away at my stuff, I got in touch with all that I thought I was deprived of. And today I have a life-giving, healthy, meaningful spirituality. So when God gives the gift of sobriety, the gift of recovery in Al-Anon or another 12-step program, I believe he says three things. One, I'm interrupting your death. Your work's not finished. Carry a message. Walk with. Pass it on. Be the fellowship. Two, you will share relationship with these people. They will come into your life and you will come into theirs. And third, with this gift of sobriety, this gift of recovery, I give you your dignity. Walk tall. So my prayer for you as you go about your appointed rounds, a day at a time, is that you'll have your sobriety, your recovery if you're in another program, and as a result of that, I just know you'll have your dignity. And I close, the miracle does take place. She does close with a favorite piece from the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. If you haven't identified thus far, I'm sure you will identify. Here I found an ingredient that had been lacking in any other effort I had made to save myself. Here was power. Here was power to live to the end of any given day. Power to have courage to face the next day. Power to have friends. Power to help people. Power to be sane. Power to stay sober. And the very short version of Maurice's story, I had talked it over with Anna. Maybe I should do the short version. And she said, well, no, I think you could do a little more. Sometime they'll invite me for the short version. I'm sure you can identify with it. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved someone like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found, was blind, but now I see. And may God, however you understand that, God, may God bless you, and God bless me, and God keep you, and God keep me, because nobody does it quite as well. Thank you.